ACCE, and we're very happy to welcome you to this webinar on Indy Connect, a case study in policy development, stakeholder management, and legislative strategy. We are really happy to have here with us this afternoon Mark Fisher of the Indy Chamber, who will tell us the story of the Chamber's successful 3-year effort to win voter and legislative support for its Indy Connect transportation initiative. So we'll get started now, and I just want to give a few little housekeeping details, and then I'm going to pass it on to Ian Scott. Please first remember to place your phone on mute so we can avoid background noise. We appreciate that. Secondly, if you have questions, we would love you to ask them, and you can use the chat function of the webinar to do so. The chat box is on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Just type in your question. We here at ACCE will see it, and then we will ask Mark the question when he comes to a break or takes a breath or something like that. So he would like you to ask questions, so please feel free to do so. If we can't get them in during the presentation, we'll ask them at the end, and we should have a few minutes at the end for additional questions as well. And then finally, the webinar is being recorded, and it should be up on the ACC website within the next few days or at the beginning of next week. Mark has also will have his presentation materials. We'll have those online as well for download. So please just feel free to listen, participate, and know that the details in the recording and the presentation materials will be available to you online. So with that, I will turn the mic over to Ian Scott.
Thanks, Susan. I've had the pleasure of seeing Mark's presentation twice before for public sector audiences, and thought it was high time to share his insight and knowledge and expertise with our audience. We're really glad to get this on the agenda, and thank everybody from the GR division who's usually on our open flow conference calls at this time for logging on via GoToWebinar for this little different version of the GR division call. Before we hand it over to Mark, though, I did want to introduce our division's new chair, Katie Kirkpatrick, who's the Chief Policy Officer at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, has graciously agreed to step on and serve as chair of the GR division. She and Hannah and I have already had a couple conversations about how we're going to breathe some new life into a couple parts of our program, and calls like this is just one way we're starting that. Katie has been with the Metro Atlanta Chamber since 2007. She's always been in their policy department, Vice President of Environmental Affairs, Senior VP for Business and Higher Ed, Senior VP for Policy Innovation and Entrepreneurship. She's kind of run the gamut there now, Chief Policy Officer. One of those interesting backgrounds to come into the chamber profession. Katie's actually a civil engineer, an Auburn civil engineer by trade, and so was actually in engineering practice for over a decade before coming to the chamber. So one of those ways where anything can prepare you for this sort of work. So before we hand it over to Mark, I wanted to let Katie say a few things in intro.
Thanks, Ian, and welcome everyone on the call, and I look forward to hopefully meeting or speaking with most of you throughout this year. And I hope that with the support of ACCE staff that we can make these conference calls and any events useful to you as you go about your daily practice as advocacy or government affairs professionals. And so I too have seen Mark's presentation. I think it is a wonderful case study that regardless of the size of your chamber, you can benefit from hearing. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Mark and let him start us off.
Thank you, Katie and Ian and everybody online. So this presentation is about our efforts to get enabling legislation passed at the Indiana General Assembly to fund a regional transportation plan. But really, this could be applied to many large initiatives. Very rarely do large policy changes happen in 1 year or overnight, and especially ones that include a cultural shift or a generational shift. So they don't really happen the first year. It was noted earlier that this was our 3-year plan, when in fact it was a 5-year and beyond plan. But it is a case study in developing a plan, building the community support, and passing through the legislature, enabling legislation or funding legislation after repeated attempts and tweaks to the bill and to different strategies. So just a little bit of background about Indiana, the Hoosier State. We've got about 6.5 million people, almost 7 million people now. Our legislature is 100 members of the House of Representatives elected every 2 years. Our Senate is 50 members elected on staggered 4-year terms. We have a Republican Governor, Mike Pence. Indianapolis is the state capital. We're also the largest city and the economic driver for the state. We specialize a lot in education, healthcare, finance, and information technology, and of course, being the state capital, government services. We have a mayor/county executive. We have a unigov system, a combined city-county government, where our mayor of Indianapolis is also the county executive, the single county executive. We have 29 counselors, city-county counselors, 25 district, 4 at-large. The 4 at-large seats will actually be eliminated heading into our municipal elections next year. Being the state capital in the largest city and a largely rural state can cause a lot of animosity. Within our what we call our 9-county central Indiana region, we have a lot of legislative clout, but as far as the core city of Indianapolis, we've lost clout over the last 20 years in our legislature. We do have within our region 19 of the 50 state senators and 32 of the 100 state representatives, so we have a large delegation, but given the makeup of very urban, suburban, and very rural areas within our 9-county region, very, very diverse interests. But we do have overwhelming Republican supermajorities in both the House and the Senate, and with the Republican governor. Most people, I think, have asked me to give this presentation because they want to know how we pass transit legislation under these circumstances. And actually, these numbers reflect current, but they were a little less supermajority last year, but still nonetheless supermajority. A lot of perceptions of Indianapolis. I'm sure if you represent a large city in a rural state, we get everything. We're a non-home rule state, so we have to have all 150 legislators vote on some of the most basic issues that we would like to do at the local level. So they're tired of dealing with Indianapolis issues. We have the conflicts between the city versus the region versus the state. There's a perception that any big city can't govern itself, so why should we give them more authority or more flexibility? Fact is, Marion County, Indianapolis is 400 square miles. That's 400 square miles of you can live in a penthouse in downtown Indianapolis or live on a 15-acre farm within about 10 minutes drive of each other. But we have a very, very regional workforce and regional economy, but still the core city, 4% of all jobs in Indiana, 10% of all jobs paying above $40,000 in the state of Indiana are located in a very compact area of downtown Indianapolis. And we have about 205,000 people that drive into Marion County every day to work. Very important in Indianapolis and Indiana, we have a local income tax structure. Local option income taxes are paid in the county of residence, not necessarily where you earn your income. So it's about $18 billion a year is earned by non-residents that work in Indianapolis but don't pay local income taxes. So while we have a great level of regional cooperation, there is still tension between this core city and the suburbs. The current challenges of our system, I'm actually a board member of our transit system, Indigo. We have limited service and access. As you can see, the numbers show that for a city of our size, we are woefully underfunded. Our transit system does really well given the resources they are provided, but they're still underfunded. We have half the bus system of Cincinnati, half the bus system of Columbus, Ohio. So when we talk a lot about transit at the State House, people will say, well, you're not Chicago, you're not New York City, but we really benchmarked ourselves against peer cities who we would consider our peer cities. 7% of the working adults in Indianapolis lack access to a car. 50% of families that are working only have one car. It's infrequent, so our headways are half an hour or 1 hour. We're going through a process now of retooling that, where we go to a more ridership versus coverage model, but that will hopefully improve those headway times, get it down to 10 to 15-minute headways for popular routes. But we have a problem. We have a lot of growth and jobs outside of Marion County, but our transit system is confined to Indianapolis, Marion County. A lot of the jobs in warehousing and logistics are located out of Marion County, but are being filled by Marion County residents. You can't access the job, so it's not just about getting people into Marion County and out to their home counties at the end of the day, but it is about that reverse commute. People that are living in Indianapolis, Marion County, but trying to access jobs beyond our county boundaries. So what happened? We went to, as many chambers do, we do our leadership exchange every year, where we take a delegation of 100 business and community leaders to a different city to learn best practices, learn how they're dealing with similar issues that we've faced. And we went to Denver, our first ever leadership exchange in 2008, and we saw what was possible after examining the Fast Tracks program and the build-out, the transit-oriented development, the workforce mobility that was impacted, and it became abundantly clear that we needed to do something in Indianapolis to ensure that we had a healthy future. So what we did is the private sector, which was Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, which is our 50 largest employers and the large universities around town. This, in some cities, they're called corporate partnerships or corporate councils. Some of them are housed at the chamber. We spun ours off in the late 80s. We partnered with them, the Indy Chamber. CICF, our Central Indiana Community Foundation, is very, very involved in placemaking, walkability. They joined in as well. And then our MIBOR, which is the Metropolitan Indianapolis Board of Realtors. Of course, they're interested in home values and economic development. These four private sector groups came together, and hand in hand with our Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization, CERTA, which is our regional transit authority that really doesn't do much right now because there isn't transit outside of the one county, our transit corporation, Indigo, and then the state Department of Transportation. They were going through the process of their COA, the Comprehensive Operational Analysis, and doing long-range planning that is required of any transit corporation. What we were able to do is come together with the private sector and hire a consultant, HDR, to do an econometric study. Based on the plans that were being produced or vetted by the public sector groups, we were able to kind of do a ROI study on the different options that were being under consideration. So a lot of meetings, a lot of in-person meetings, a lot of time, a lot of hand-holding, but the level of cooperation between the public and the private was seamless. In fact, once we get, there we go, we developed what was the Indy Connect plan, which was a plan to build out our regional transportation, our regional transit service, not just in Indianapolis, Marion County, but throughout the region by 2020. It would double the local bus service. It would add express bus and circulators, and then 5 rapid transit corridors. One would be eligible for rail. All the others would be bus rapid transit, which is also a new concept in Indianapolis. So what we did was the public sector was called Indy Connect, and that was the official transit plan, and then the advocacy, outreach, and campaign side was Indy Connect Now. If you Googled those two and went on their websites, you would find that the websites are almost indistinguishable, but that just demonstrates the level of cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. So we developed the plan, but we had to go out and build support for the plan. This was the largest public outreach campaign in our city's history. We formed speakers bureaus where we brought in volunteers from across the business community and otherwise the broader community, trained them on what the plan was, what the plan wasn't, what we were asking for. this is even before we approached the legislature for any enabling legislation. We had over 100,000 visits, and these are actually some dated stats. Over 4,500 Facebook fans, Twitter followers, a total of 57 public meetings, over 2,000 individuals. The Speakers Bureau, we would go to an opening of an envelope. If you asked us to come speak to 2 people, we were there as long as we could pitch the plan. This is really critical because this really made sure that the issue of transit was permeated all discussions. It was a part of the political discourse during campaign season. So a legislator or a local official that was running for office couldn't escape this issue because we had reached out to so many groups and involved so many people on the front end before we even approached the legislature. I'm going to pause in case there are any questions so far. No?
I don't see any questions yet, Mark.
Okay, great.
If anyone has questions, please feel free to type it in the question box.
So once we were able to build that broad community support for what that plan was, we first needed to go to the legislature for enabling legislation. We are a non-home rule state. Part of the analysis that we did with HDR was looking at various funding streams, what funding streams would generate the adequate amount of revenue to fully implement the plan. We used very, very conservative estimates, and that's where I think we were smart to use very conservative estimates, because what was happening at the time that we had approached the legislature were, I think, Charlotte and Denver, their plans were coming in above. They were coming in above budget, and so it was easy for a legislator to point to those and say, well, you know, your plans are just a rosy picture. We didn't ask for any funding from the state. This is all local dollars that would leverage federal dollars. So we approached the legislature a lot. We had a few unsuccessful attempts. The first year we didn't get a hearing. The second year we got tripped up with another issue, and then the third year we were finally successful. But these are the 5 R's of effective lobbying that I'd like to run through, just because these are really critical in how you approach a legislature, both before the legislative session starts, and then once you're in the midst of session, how you conduct yourself. So the first one is you have to have the right message. With a rural legislature that already feels Indianapolis gets a lot, that is suspect of transit. You know, a lot we heard this was nobody would use it. It's just another form of welfare. My constituents won't use it, or the state's going to have to bail out Indianapolis. We had to have the right message. We looked at this was a local option. We required that we have a 3-step referendum process where the local officials had to vote to put the issue on the ballot. Then we had a non-binding referendum, and then if it was successful, the local officials, our local legislative body, would have to come back and actually enact the tax. So it's a local option. So the state legislature that doesn't like to deal with Indianapolis issues really wasn't dealing with an Indianapolis issue. We weren't asking them to vote increase taxes or vote to endorse a plan. We were simply asking them to allow us to have the debate at the local level where this should be had. The referendum. We are not a referendum state. We don't have a history of it. When we capped property taxes, constitutionally capped our property taxes, we instituted a series of capital project referendum processes. And so in the midst of that, we felt very strongly the people that were guiding the Transit Task Force in 2009 felt that this should be a referendum, and that certainly helped us as we went to the legislature to say it's not the legislature raising taxes, it's not the locals raising taxes without input of their constituents. There was no state money, and I think we wrote that in, that there was no moral obligation of the state to repay our bonds, that there would be no increase in state funding. I think we wrote that in 4 different places in the enabling legislation. And then when we as a business community talked about transit, we didn't necessarily talk a lot about how cool it was and how it's going to appeal to millennials and how it's going to help talent attraction. We certainly use that in the right audience, but we really focused on the issue of workforce mobility and the fact that we had companies that wanted to invest in our communities but knew that they could not get the workers to their job location. So workforce mobility, and then the next slide I'll talk a little bit about the diverse coalition we built, but we used different messages depending on who the audience was. So we're a very strong charter school state, but we don't provide transportation dollars for charter schools. We went to charter school advocates and said, look, public transportation could be used to help these charter schools get students to their location. We had a lot of religious organizations that took a social justice aspect to it, but also people trying to get to the church on Sundays. And healthcare was a big issue. School and healthcare. We like to say people are going to go spend money, earn money, or learn how to make money. And so we had a lot of help from our universities, our community college system, who has students that were balancing careers, education, and families, and how inconvenient it was for transit. So it was definitely the right message to the right audience, and you have to tailor your message based on who you're talking to. So from the right person, we had a coalition of diverse interests. I'm going to click forward just so you can see this. We had architects and ULI. We had Central Indiana Conference of Elected Officials. This is the first time that the mayors in our 9-county region come together on a bi-monthly basis to talk about regional efforts. All 29 members of that conference signed on in support of this legislation, which is a big statement, even though some of them would not be affected, or some of them even flat out said, I'm not going to support this when it gets to the ballot, but I think we need to have this discussion at the local level.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Mark, this is Susan. We did have one question.
Sure.
Was asked that they may have missed this, but how much state funding does the transit system receive?
So not a lot. There is the State Department of Transportation does have one person, I believe, that works on transit issues. We have a fund called the Public Mass Transportation Fund that was, it used to be a percentage of the state sales tax, but a few years ago they flatlined it and they made it a line item instead of a dedicated source. So I believe right now it is about $45 million or $50 million a year that is dispersed to any qualifying transit agency throughout the state. So it's very minimal. I think our system gets about $17 million a year, if that, from the state PMTF. But the state has just shown very little interest right now in from a state perspective, funding transit throughout the state. That's one of our legislative issues right now, is trying to increase the funding for PMTF. So I talked about university systems, both IUPUI, which is Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. They are landlocked in downtown Indianapolis, and they're spending a lot of money on parking garages. Their argument was, we're going to need this space for classroom space and research space. We don't need to keep building parking garages at a cost to the state. ARC of Indiana, Bosma Enterprises for the Blind was a big supporter of ours, which was great because Brian Bosma, the namesake, or the son of the namesake of Bosma Enterprises for the Blind, is our Speaker of the House. The realtors, AARP, they have a big aging in place movement right now. So they were great advocates for us. Hoosier Environmental Council, United Way, IndyCan, which is the Indy Congregational Action Network, a group of religious leaders, Community Economic Development, and we actually went out for the first time in our history and hired lobbyists outside of staff. So we had environmentalists, we had labor groups. The labor groups aren't on there. The building trades, AFL-CIO were huge supporters of ours. So we had business groups in labor, environmental, religious, social service, educational. All of these added to our toolbox of messaging and of support. So we were able to go to different legislators with different messages. We were able to have a diverse group. When we testified, we had a 4-hour committee hearing where we had 40 people testify in support of the bill and only 2 testify against. And the 2 took about 10 minutes combined. So we were able to show and demonstrate robust, diverse support. So from the right person, having those different organizations, being able to talk to their constituents, their allies in the State House. Also, finding the right sponsor is really key. We had a sponsor who was the chairman of Ways and Means one year who had only taken on sponsorship of the bill so he could control it. I don't believe that he had any intention of actually moving the bill, but he wanted to control the bill, and it ultimately did not even get out of his own committee, out of Ways and Means. So we were able to find the right sponsor in the House, who was actually a regional legislator, somebody that was outside of Indianapolis, that was the champion. And when we got over to the Senate, our Senate side, we have 7 Republican senators that represent Indianapolis, but we only have 1 that just represents Indianapolis. And that person, so we know that person has Indianapolis, Marion County interests at heart, and she would be our champion. She's also the chairman of the Senate Health Committee and is in a senior leadership position. So it certainly helped our efforts to have somebody that had a tremendous amount of respect. I don't know how many people legislators I heard tell me, well, if Senator Miller or Representative Torr wants this, I'm for it, just because they had such tremendous amount of respect amongst their colleagues. And to the right audience is the next one. Next are previous strategies that were unsuccessful, kind of thought we could work through legislative leadership, and I think that's a product of years gone by, of bygone years, where it used to be that you could control, and at least in Indiana, you got 7, 8 people in a room, and they determined how things were going to move forward. But leadership and influence is so diffuse these days that, and especially with supermajorities, you have a lot more rogue members. It's much easier to control if you have a slim majority than supermajorities. I think most legislative leadership will tell you that we had to really have a strategy of all 150 legislators. We did independent vote counts once a week. I'll get to the coalition management side of this, but we did a five-tier vote count every week. 2 lobbyists had to talk to every legislator to get that independent vote count and to make sure that we knew exactly where people stood. So that was key, that we got all 150. In the end, we were able to pass this legislation with 2/3 of both chambers and get positive remarks at the bill signing from Governor Pence. The fact that we got over 50% of each caucus is telling how effective it is when you really do target every member. And don't take any vote for granted. I had a lot of legislators that you think were Tea Party aligned that would never support this. We had Americans for Prosperity against this. They were trying to kill it. But when we have the right message to the legislator and you go and talk to them about it, it really can make a difference. Getting the governor's office, they couldn't support it, but they sure could have done us in. But they remained neutral. In the end, they ended up signing the bill. When we had Governor Mitch Daniels, his last State of the State address, he specifically called out our efforts, although it was eventually unsuccessful in the legislature. Having the governor in a State of the State call out your individual bill certainly is beneficial. And then NDOT, getting them on board from the beginning. As I said, a lot of our folks will say it should be renamed the Indiana Department of Highways. They are critical because a lot of the federal funding will come through them, and they could have easily filled this. We needed to make sure that to neutralize the road builders, who are very, very powerful lobby in our state, that we had to guarantee that this was not going to take from their source of funding. We are big advocates at the Indy Chamber for highway and road and infrastructure funding. We were very supportive of our Major Moves initiative at the state level to privatize our toll road for $3.8 billion. We've done privatization at the local level. And how we approach this was this is about building a system, a transportation system. It wasn't transit versus roads. This was about a network and a system. But we had to guarantee that this would not take from highway sources. And in the end, that proved effective. At the right time, the old saying is you can't educate why they legislate. So we started this back in 2009. We built a lot of community support, but we also did a lot of educating of legislators on the front end before they got into the legislative session. We got special permission to do fact-finding missions. So I think we took legislators and local elected officials to Charlotte, Salt Lake, and Denver to check out their systems. Those are similar-sized cities and similarly situated states. And really, that helped convince them or show them the benefits of transit. Also, at the right time, I mentioned that we had 2 unsuccessful attempts at the legislature. We did become a victim of controversy. We were going through a debate of whether to become a right-to-work state. The bill that was being carried by our Ways and Means chair that did not make it out of Ways and Means, didn't even make it out of committee because dueling interests were amending right-to-work legislation into our bill, and it ended up dying. So we didn't give up, even though we became a victim of that debate. We didn't give up. We came back the next year. It got sent to a summer study committee. We didn't give up then, and we were finally successful at the legislature on our third attempt. The last R in the 5 R's is in the right manner, and this is really critical in the coalition management phase. We had feedback after the first 2 failed attempts that there were legislators that felt that members of our coalition were insulting them, insulting their intelligence, insulting their way of life. It was the whole, oh, you guys are just a bunch of rural hicks and you don't know how a big city is run, and you know, you're so behind the times, or you're old. But we really had to do a lot of message discipline, and you know, when we get to the side of coalition management, unfortunately, somebody sometimes has to be the bad guy, and how you manage who is involved, who's in the room when decisions are made, and how you communicate that out, and how do you communicate out to a broader audience. I will say, going back to from the right person, family members are very effective in getting to legislators. We had a very powerful member of our state Senate that had originally agreed to sign on to sponsor the bill, then came off because he wasn't sure, ended up voting against it the first 2 years. He eventually came around because he called his son, who had moved to Denver, and said, hey, these Indy Chamber folks are telling me that transit, that this millennial generation, this upcoming generation wants to live in urban settings, wants more mobility options, and that people are judging cities by how robust their transit system is. Tell me that's not true. And the senator's son said, oh yeah, that's absolutely true. And so no matter how much data we could produce, it came down to a conversation with this legislator's son to get him to move into the yes column. So you've seen this slide before, diverse coalition of interests. Message discipline, again, is really, really key. And there's message discipline to legislators. So here are the key talking points. And then the message discipline out to the broader groups. And these groups have their own constituencies. You know, it's really tough to say, guys, we really need you to communicate to your folks. Here are the key messages. You can't control it always, but it's really in the best interest to come up with what your key messages are, and really hope that your coalition or employ your coalition to follow those key messages and not get off track. because especially if you're getting feedback that one message is more powerful than the other, you really need to reinforce those messages. Accurate vote counts. It was great to have a lot of lay people in the halls working, writing in messages to their legislators, but non-professional lobbyists aren't the best vote counters. They take legislators, yeah, sure, yeah, I support that as a yes vote when that's not necessarily the case. So when we do vote counts, we do hard no, leans no, undecided, leans yes, hard yes. Nobody moves out of any column until you had 2 independently verified responses. And I'll just say that a lot of the lay people had very inaccurate vote counts. So that's why you have to have those independent vote counts, 2 different lobbyists talking to them. Calls to action were the groups, especially the ones of statewide constituency, were very beneficial for us, even though this was a central Indiana issue. A lot of groups outstate were looking at this as a model that could be implemented locally. So we were very, very happy and grateful to have support of statewide groups to help to push this message and to reach legislators all across the state. Also, a thing about the coalition management is it's really important to have one point person for the legislators to talk to. If it's when the bill is going to be heard, who we need to talk to, message discipline, editing and refining the language or amendments. I'm working on a coalition right now that had way too many points of contact, no one single point of contact, and we ended up losing because we had so many mixed messages. So keeping 1, maybe 2 people as point to work directly with the sponsors is really going to be key to making sure that you're keeping everything together, you're not mixing signals, and that everybody knows where the bill stands, when it's going to be heard, and what the message is. So what did we get? We got a bill. It's not. It wasn't the prettiest. We knew that we will not do a referendum until 2016. We passed this in the 2014 legislative session. We knew that we could come back and clean stuff up. We had a lot of, this gets back to the coalition management. We had a lot of folks that couldn't live with this prohibition on light rail. But I kept arguing to them or saying to them, it's much better to come back and debate the merits of a narrowly defined issue like rail versus BRT than it is to continue to have the discussion of whether we like transit or not. So while you might not get everything the first time around, getting something in statute that you can tweak, it's much easier to tweak than to create statute. So even if this isn't about transit, you have another issue, and you know you have time to work with something, and you're confident that you're going to have that ability to come back and have that opportunity to tweak, I always go for get something in statute, come back and fix it later. Because we couldn't, for us and CICP and our partners, we had put in all in over $1 million into this effort over the 5 years that we were engaged in this, doing hiring consultants and lobbyists and marketing and staff time. $1 million is a lot of money to keep throwing at a losing issue, and so we had to be very clear with our coalition partners that didn't like one aspect of the bill or not was, this is great, but if we don't get something done, we're going to take a few years off and you're on your own. And that kind of got them to wake up and realize that it was better to see something pass than to see a bill die and wait till the perfect bill can pass. I think that they were also very surprised how much money it takes to be successful at this. We use a lot of small nonprofits and grassroots organizations that are great for the grassroots calls to action, but they have very little concept of what it takes financially to be successful at this. So letting them know how much we had spent and that we weren't able to continue to spend that money on a losing issue, I certainly helped keep people together. We know that we know that what this bill is not what it will be next year. We will come back next year looking at the 10% annual operating expense that has to come from other sources and taxes and fares. This was a compromise. Because the business community was pushing this, we had some Republican legislators that decided it would be good to create and implement a tax on C corporations in downtown Indianapolis. That was not going to fly. It was a poison pill. We were able to come up with some language, much like we have a Parks Foundation to help on capital projects for parks in our town. We could start an Indigo Foundation to help raise money, at least for that first year. We were also able to write that. Yes?
Mark, whenever anybody talks operating revenue or rather program revenue from the chamber side, it always elicits questions from the audience, and we've got a couple. So I thought I'd ask you to pause and elaborate just a little bit, if you will. You said it was $1 million overall over 5 years. Could you kind of break that down, how you guys both raised the money and spent the money over the course of that 5 years? What did it look like, impact on your budget?
Sure. Well, between all organizations, is about $1 million a year. We spent a lot of money, I think about a little over $250,000 on the econometric study, doing that cost-benefit analysis. Money well spent, because we had the details of a financial plan, a very conservative cash flow, largely cash flow financial plan that we could take to the legislature. We knew what taxes generated what. We knew what the development potential is on these lines. So having that information up front was very key. We spent probably 100 to 150 over the 4 years that we were at the legislature on outside lobbyists. We spent a lot of money on website development, communications tools. We took some of this from the reserve because this was an issue that our board had identified as a key issue, and we have a kind of internally at our chamber, we have a process for identifying key projects that would be funded if they're not in our annual budget, but as they come up, we have guidelines to how we would dip into our reserves. Those reserves are not to be used for really operating, but kind of large one-time initiatives. So we were able to dip into reserves. Sorry?
The opportunity fund. I've heard a lot of chambers call it the opportunity fund.
Yes. We went out and raised money from those that would be most affected. So you saw that coalition of hospitals and educators, higher education institutions, consulting engineers, contractors, developers, people that would have skin in the game should a transit system be built out. And so that was, so we cobbled together that much money, and we had to go back to the well a few times because we were unsuccessful the first few times at the legislature. Does that answer that question? We hired a political fundraiser. We hired a political fundraiser that had run our mayor's campaign, so knew where all the money was, knew who was interested in what. That person went out and drummed up a lot of support, financial support. We hired a campaign team in anticipation of a referendum, a Republican and a Democrat to do polling, to run the ground game. We haven't been there yet, so we've actually severed ties with our political team, but we will probably be re-engaging them in 2016 after our municipal elections.
Thanks for elaborating. Yes, thanks for elaborating. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So again, the theme is don't let great be the enemy of good. So outreach. Here's some things when it comes to the coalition management and the communications and media relations. Outreach, the role of media. We used every single means of communication, Twitter, Facebook. I don't know if we used Instagram. Letters to the editor, ed board reviews, our internal communications. You know, it was nice that we had universal editorial board support from our publications. Everything from the Indianapolis Star to the Business Journal to our weekly alternative newspaper, we're on board with our plan. It really helps maintain a lot of the momentum because we have a part-time legislature. Short years, they adjourn in mid-March. Long session, they adjourn late May or late April. And so there's a lot of lag time where people don't really see what's going on. It's not being debated, but you still need to maintain that momentum. So having the earned media helped us maintain momentum. And it also addressed the issues from different angles. So we had the alternative newspaper or the columnists that were writing completely different stories than the reporters that are just, kind of reporting the facts of the debate. There was some issue with story fatigue, and then we got people saying, well, it's just the Indianapolis Star, they're just a liberal rag, and so they started questioning the partiality. But you also have to take the good with the bad. We talked about message discipline and being, having some legislators feel like they were insulted. When we were running, got all these great stories, but you have a firebrand columnist that isn't just talking about your one issue, but it has a whole host of other issues that they are insulting legislators on. How beneficial is that? We had paid media as well. That allowed for the cohesive messaging from the business and private sector. And it raised awareness of the public process. There was a con, so transit agencies, when they're going out and doing their plans, there is a federally funded, you get funds to do public outreach, and that means you can do paid media. They did, right around the time that our bills were being introduced, they did some public awareness ads on TV that could have been perceived as pro-transit and pro-legislation. Even though it wasn't, it was raising awareness of the plan, getting people to engage and go to the public meeting, but it certainly looked pro-transit as our bills were moving. So the bill actually prohibits use of public dollars being spent on an advocacy issue, even though that's currently illegal, that you can't do that anyways. They still felt the need to write that into the bill. And then finally, the role of social media. It is great for lobbyists out there that follow their legislature. I don't know how your rooms are configured, but a lot of our committee rooms are very small, very tight. The reporters our news reporters get front seats, so they live tweet. It is tremendous to follow them and not have to be in the room, to hear every word. And it's a powerful tool for lobbyists to use. You get to the people that can't come down to the State House, unable to attend hearings. You reach those people. You mobilize a key demographic, the young folks, the folks that are really going to take that next step to call their legislator are on social media. They're engaged. Every time we had a committee hearing, we had a very intentional strategy to be very public on social media. Our hashtag #IamTransit trended every time we had a committee hearing, or every time that there's a vote taken on this issue. So it is powerful, but it does come with some drawbacks. Limited demographic reach. Older folks tend not to be on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any of the other ones that I'm not even on. So there is a limited demographic reach. There is an echo chamber. You can start to believe your own press. If you get retweeted 100 times, wow, there must be thousands of people, and it could just be the same 100 people that you're talking to. They're sitting around you in a committee hearing. And it was very tough to control that message. Once you get on social media and you are asking people to tweet and support your effort, you've got to take the good with the bad. That means when people on Twitter are insulting or getting in Twitter fights as debate is happening on the floor of the House or the Senate with legislators, not really a good thing. So there are certainly, we saw this as the pros far outweigh the cons, but just know that when you are going out there and communicating that whatever is said on your issue in support of your issue will be tied to your organization. That is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
If y'all have any questions, you can type them in the question box, and we will read them to Mark.
And Mark, one question. You spoke a lot about organizing your coalition partners, working them actively throughout the whole campaign. Can you talk about your internal messaging to your own members, internal to the Indy Chamber? How much engagement of the existing membership was there, or was there really large consensus among your members that this was the right course of action?
First, you had to frame the issue. We used to have a very comprehensive transit system in Indianapolis, and then up through right around the 70s, transit was treated as a social safety net. It was another form of welfare. So it was an issue of helping people understand how woefully underfunded and woefully resourced our transit system was, and using those benchmarks against peer cities. What we were asking to do in our plan is actually just bring us up to where Columbus, Ohio is now. And I think stuff like that, messaging like that, really got people to wake up. They have a lot of kids that have left. We have a brain drain problem. We educate a lot of folks in Indiana. I think we're 17th in the nation for producing college grads, but 44th in the nation for the percentage of our adult population with a college degree. So we have great schools. People are coming here. They tend not to stay here, and we have a lot of people that grow up here, go to our universities, and then leave. And so a lot of people have those personal connections with their kids that have chosen to live elsewhere. And that getting back to that legislator, you know, he didn't believe it until he talked to his own son. So I think a lot of people in the polling we did, we asked, do you use transit here? Virtually no one did. Then we asked, do you use transit when you are visiting other places? And that number jumped up. So it was a lot of educating on the front end of what the issue was, that this is an important issue to talented young folks, but also we have individual companies, and that's one thing that we did. We told stories. We told stories of our companies that have to hire their own private shuttle service to pick up where Indigo drops off, and how long it takes, 3 hours for people to work a 7-hour shift. We have the second largest FedEx hub. They're one of the large companies that spearheaded the transit initiative because they literally cannot get their workers. They have to send a private shuttle to pick up at the end of the line where Indigo drops off. So we did a lot of communicating. We, at every one of our business after hours or our events, we really highlighted that. We highlighted it with our e-communications, our weekly updates. So it was, for 3 or 4 years, the number one issue that was in every single communications piece.
Mark, thanks. Highly practical presentation throughout. I always encourage presenters to focus on communications and framing, and that was really the thrust throughout. So we really do appreciate it. For everybody else who's on the line, obviously you've got Mark's contact details. I hope you'll reach out to him offline if you have other detailed questions you want to follow up on. A quick plug. Circulating for the past month has been a letter, Chambers for Infrastructure Investment. This is a letter to Congress that was initiated by a group of chambers, including the Los Angeles Area Chamber, the Albany Colony Regional Chamber, the Metro Hartford Alliance. 250 chambers have now signed on to this letter, 250 state, metro, regional, and local chambers from all 50 states. We are preparing to release that letter Friday. with instructions for a media release and congressional release on Tuesday. So it's the final push. If your organization has not signed that letter yet and you're interested in it, want to add your name, this is a very simple one-page letter. We'd love to have you on, but we need to know soon. Let Hannah or I know if you'd like to have your name added. If you're not sure if you signed on, we can confirm that too. acce.org/transportation is where you can access that letter. And we do have another call on the calendar. We'll go back to our open dialogue. Next call is on Thursday, March the 26th at 2 p.m. Katie, are you still on and live? Can we hear you?
I am. I'm still here.
You and I had discussed an issue ahead of time, religious freedom issue. Do you want to tee that up a little bit for our March call?
Well, I think many of us have probably either experienced or are currently going through discussions at our state legislatures regarding religious freedom, either expansion of existing laws on the books or consideration of new ones. And so we thought it might be an applicable time to have a conversation about what that looks like in varying states, what different chambers are doing in response to it, perhaps if there's any key terms to keep an eye out for, etc.
So we'll take other ideas as well. If there's other topics you'd like to get into when we get together next. That's Thursday, March 26th, 2 p.m. We hope you'll mark that on your calendar for the next GR Division call. And again, Mark, thank you so much for being the talent on today's. I think this will be a great resource for people for months and years to come as we post it on our website.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. This ends our webinar. We appreciate your participation. And again, look for a recording on the ACC website within the next 3, 4, 5 days or so. All right? Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.